Welcome to the Power Factor Show. Episode 108.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Power Factor. Today I'm going to talk about setting up and reloading on the Dillon SL900. Now, as you guys probably remember, or not, way back quite a few months ago, John and I were talking about our first episodes on shotshell reloading, and I was mentioning I was using a single stage press, and how I was looking possibly at some point in the future of getting a progressive press, and kind of hinted that I might lead toward Hornady. But since, I've always been kind of a fan of Dillon presses, I have the Dillon 550B that I use for metallic loading. I thought, I really ought to stick with what I like and stick with what I know. Dillon makes great presses, and that's really the primary reason I went with the SL900, and also because of the support that Dillon always provides. I mean, we've talked about this before, but if you have anything that goes wrong with the Dillon press, you call them up and you have replacement parts in a couple of days. And I'm not saying that you're going to need replacement parts, but I've seen cases where people have literally broken things on their own because of something they did, and or they buy a press at a garage sale, whatever it is, it's in pretty bad condition, send it back to Dillon and they'll redo it for you. So at any rate, Dillon SL900, my mech size master has been relegated to the top bench back here right now. It's kind of funny because I kind of talked before about, John's ability to have two different presses set up and to make two different loads. And it could be that maybe what I'll do is take my mech press and put it in the side here and use it for my skeet loads, which I don't load as much skeet as I normally do for sporting clays or 5-stand or trap or whatever. So basically that's my high volume stuff, and that's really the reason for the SL900. So we'll see about that, but at any rate. The other thing I wanted to show you is my new reloading bench. The last time that you guys were here, I was reloading on the mech press, showing you how to reload on a single stage press. And I was using a very small reloading bench to do it on. One of the problems there with that setup is that because of where my press was, it didn't give me a whole lot of room to clean my shotgun. In fact, my barrel would literally kind of be between the press and the end of the bench. So now I have a whole lot more room. This is actually a design that is out for setting up a reloading bench. In fact, we'll put the link to it. In fact, it'll magically appear right about here in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Right there, yeah. So it's Shotgun Sports Magazine. They have a download section, and you can get it from that for those of you who like to listen rather than watch. But it's a great bench. Didn't cost a whole lot to make. In fact, my father-in-law built it for me. We were going to build it together as a project, but he didn't have a whole lot to do, so he kind of jumped on it and literally built the whole entire thing before I had a chance to help out at all. So, but it gives you lots of different storage, good height, lots of space for all your stuff. So, at any rate, so I thought what we'd do today is go through on the SL900, and I was going to go through each station, talk about some of the things that I've noticed with it, some of the adjustments, some of the things to look out for, and kind of do just a general overall view of reloading on the SL900. Now, one thing I can tell you is that when I ordered the SL900, this comes from the factory set up to reload a Winchester AA hole or AA shell. In fact, this is one that they ship with it as a reference. It's inert, but it's a Winchester AA hole using the Winchester, what's called the WAA-12 wad, which is a 1 1/8 ounce wad, set up to reload 1 1/8 ounce shot. Well, it turns out that that's all well and good, but I don't load that. I am using the Remington Gun Club hole. I'm using Federal primers instead of Winchester primers. I'm using a smaller capacity wad, and I'm reloading 7/8 of an ounce as opposed to 1 1/8. the thing is the press is set up to reload Winchester, and I'm set up to reload something completely different. So I have had to go through and literally readjust every single position or every single station on this press to get it to reload holes the way I want. Now, one of the things I understand, and I don't know if this is still the case, and I'm going to look into this, and by the time this airs, I'll have an answer for you, and we'll put it up either with the show notes on the web page, or also add it as a comment on the YouTube page. But I understand at one point, and maybe they still do it, that when you go to order one of these presses, you can contact Dillon and say, hey, this is what I'm loading on, or this is what I'm loading for. Can you please set the press up in advance so that when I get it, it's going to be very close to what what I'm loading. There's kind of a good and bad thing with that. You can do that, you'll get it, it'll be set, ready to go, you'll hardly have to do anything. On the other hand, you also want to understand what all these adjustments are on your press, and if you ever have to go and make any changes, you're going to have to figure it out on your own, just like I had to figure this out. And I shouldn't say exactly on your own, because Dillon provides a really nice manual with this thing that goes through and tells you literally how to set the press up, assemble it, put it together, put it on your bench, get it all set up, and start dialing in all the individual stations, what all the adjustments are, what to look for, and everything like that. There's also a troubleshooting guide. So they have a really good manual here. This thing's 50 pages deep, so it's not exactly light reading or anything like that. But the point being, though, is that I really think it's important to understand how the press works and how to set it up so that you can maintain it on your own, as opposed to relying or have to depend on somebody else to set it up for you. So, would I do it again and order the press set for Remington holes? Probably not. I still like, the ability to go off and figure this stuff all out on my own, and unfortunately, or I should say fortunately, I did, and because of that, I also now know how to maintain it and know a lot of the different things that happen at each station and what the adjustments are. So we'll start out with station 1 here. So just to kind of give you an overall here of the press and the different positions and everything. Basically, you have the strong mounts for the press here, mounts it off the bench. Now, one of the things you got to watch out for is that when you do mount this on the bench, you have to have clearance for the lever. They tell you to get this thing mounted as far to the front of the bench as possible, but because of the fact that where I have my lag screws in here, I need to have it bite into something, and I have a board here underneath that I wanted to make sure it got a good purchase to. So I slid the press back as far as I could go, still maintaining clearance here. I would highly recommend that when you do set one of these things up, you take all this stuff into consideration beforehand, rather than bolting it to your bench and all of a sudden finding out that you don't have enough travel. So you have your strong mounts. This is something I really appreciate. They got Zerk fittings here now on the lube points, which is pretty cool. There is a case feeder system, which we'll talk about here in a bit, but I have a case feeder here with my own modification on it right now, which we'll talk about later. You have a shot bucket that you put all your shot in, 2 support tubes for that. The shot comes down into a reservoir here. You can obviously always see how much shot you have coming in there. You need to kind of keep an eye on that, because if you don't, you may start ending up loading empty shotgun shells, which you'll figure out very quickly. You have a powder hopper here. Anybody who has a Dillon press, you're going to recognize this. This is the same powder hopper that you see on nearly all, like the 550 or the 650. Should also point out that the frame here is actually an XL650 frame. So they've taken the 650 frame and basically used it as a starting point for building the 900. You have a removable tool head. You pop these 2 pins out. You then have to go and disconnect the shot from this thing here, but basically the whole entire tool head assembly will come out. And for those who are basically loading 20 gauge, you can have a 20 gauge head set up. I don't know exactly the price, but I seem to recall it's around $300 to $400 or so for a whole entire removable tool head assembly with dies ready to go for a different caliber. And then, like any of the other Dillon stuff, you change your shell plate and a few other things, and you'll be ready to go for a different gauge. But at any rate, you have the 5 different stations here, and each one has its own function, which we'll get into here in a bit. has a primer drop system. You put a tray of primers in here, drop this or pull this little loading gate, the primers all slide down. There's a bar here that basically feeds the primers. They go into a drop tube. Those primers come down and get picked up by a pickup arm here, which then get moved into position to be inserted into the hole. There is in terms of the case feeder system, the holes will drop down into a position here and be picked up by an arm and then pushed into position into the very first station. Primers are knocked out in station 1. The hole is resized in station 1. The primers will drop into a little bucket. The hole then goes on to station 2, which is here, where it gets a primer inserted. Goes to station 3, where it gets primer and powder is inserted here in station 2. Goes into station 3, where a wad and shot is inserted. Into station 4, where it's what's called pre-crimped, and then station 5 is the final crimp, and then it is ejected and falls into a bucket that you'll see here over on the side. In terms of all the different dies and what's going on, station 1 has basically a deprimer and a collet resizer, so that's just the die for station 1 is right here. Station 2 is your standard powder drop that you recognize from Dillon. What happens here is actually the case mouth is opened up slightly and powder is dropped in here by the powder hopper or powder system here. That's at station 2. Station 3, there's a lot of stuff going on here at station 3. There's an automatic wad insert system here that inserts the wad into position. It's rammed back down through the fingers here, the finger sizer, into the hole. As you come up to the full stroke, it'll activate the shot bar. It'll drop shot into the hole. As you come down, then it rotates over for pre-crimp and final crimp. The one nice thing about this press, unlike a lot of the other shot shell presses, is that if you don't have a hole, well, I should back up. On a lot of these, you have to turn the powder and turn the shot on and turn it off. And if you don't have a shot shell in position and you do this, you end up with shot and or powder all over the place. Well, the nice thing about this is that in the case of the Dillon, it doesn't drop shot or it doesn't drop powder unless there's actually a hole there to receive it. Which can prevent a lot of messy spills all over your workbench, which I'm sure the guys with, well, Mech and or Hornady will tell you all about. But at any rate, that's one of the nice features here. You don't really need to be too or as concerned about forgetting to turn things off or turning things on with this particular press. Which is not to say that you still don't need to be careful, because hopefully, as we'll see here as I'm reloading, I'm not going to have any issues. The one thing is that I've noticed with this is that if you don't insert a primer or the primer doesn't get inserted for whatever reason, then you'll end up with powder all over the place. Now, one of those reasons which I've recently discovered here is that some of my holes, which I go dumpster diving for, have been sized with a larger primer. And we talked before about primers. There's two different really sizes of primers. There's the American size primers, and then there's the European size primers. And the European size primers are about 2 to 3 thousandths bigger than the American size primer. Well, the problem was I picked up a hole that somebody had already reloaded, and they reloaded it with a European size primer, so the primer pocket was reamed out. But of course, you don't discover that until you go to try to reload it. So I had a hole going through into station 2, pushed the primer up, and the primer immediately fell back out. Of course, I didn't see that and didn't catch it. When I rammed it up, the next position would dump the powder straight through the bottom of the hole, right out the bottom, and I had powder all over the place. So my issue right now is that I have holes that I have picked up that have been reamed out or had a larger European size primer in them, and I don't find out about them until, unfortunately, I'm going through the press. And either you can feel it a lot of times, it just doesn't seat, and when that happens, it's usually a warning sign at that point to stop and look and see what's going on, because more often than not, you probably have a hole there that has a large primer or had a large primer inserted into it, or larger primer inserted into it, and at that point you need to discard that hole. One of the things that John has done is he's using Fiocchi primers for everything, which are large. So all of his holes have been reamed out large to begin with. which is a nice way to prevent this sort of situation from happening, because everything starts big and ends big. And maybe at some point I'll switch over to the larger primer also. They're cheaper. That's one benefit. But unfortunately, once you go large, you can't go back. So it's kind of a point where you need to take that into consideration. One of the other things that I noticed here during setup is when Dillon has you set this thing up, they have you go through each individual station, going through and making the adjustments before you actually reload any holes. And one of the things you do here is you need to adjust your powder bar to make sure that you're getting the correct amount of powder drop. Now that's one of the other nice things about this, is that it doesn't use bushings, it uses an adjustable bar, so I can literally dial this thing into anything that I want. If a load calls for 17.6 grains of powder, I can get 17.6 grains of powder. And a lot of times before with shot bars, you would have a bushing, and the bushing, one bushing may throw 17.1, the other one may throw 18 or 17.9, and you've got to decide, well, do you want to go a little bit, on the high end, or whether you want to go on the low end if it's calling for 17.6. Well, I can actually load 17.6 if I want with this. So one of the adjustments here for the powder system is that you need to, using your scale, I have a Dillon scale over here, a beam scale, but literally adjusting it until you get exactly what you want in terms of the amount of powder that's going to drop. Then you go on to the next station, which is the shot station. Now, again, I mentioned before that this was delivered set up to reload 1 1/8 ounce. The shot bar that's in here, or I should say that comes with it, is designed to load 1 ounce and up. And I'm loading 7/8 of an ounce, which means this is not going to throw a light enough of a charge for me. So I had to get a different shot bar, which is designed to load for 20 and 28 gauge. It doesn't matter that it's designed for a different gauge. The point being is that it's designed to load between a 1/2 ounce and 1 ounce, and I'm loading 7/8 of an ounce. So I had to replace the shot bar. But something I discovered when I was adjusting the shot bar is that this is a powder bar from my 550, my large powder bar, and I'm just going to use this as an example. When you adjust the screw on this, the screw adjusts and pulls the bar in and out. But the point is, the screw does not go anywhere when you do this. It stays put. And the reason it stays put is because of this collar that's here. It basically pins the screw in place and captures it. Okay. With the shot bar, they have a set screw here, which is basically designed to secure the screw, but the problem is it doesn't work the same way that it does for as an example, the powder bar, because what happens here, you can see, is that this will slide in and out, and I was adjusting this thing trying to figure out why my powder wasn't, or I'm sorry, why my shot wasn't changing, and in fact going all over the place in terms of variability. I don't mean all over the floor, I mean just all over in terms of range. Well, what I did is I saw this set screw, and I thought, okay, well, the set screw, I need to back the screw off and make sure it's loose before I start adjusting things. And I didn't realize that in order to adjust this, you really need to back it off, but make sure that it's dragging and in contact with that screw, because if you don't, that will slide in and out, and you'll never get this thing set. So once I tightened that down slightly, just enough that it was dragging, I could adjust the screw in and out, and now it works like you normally would expect it to, as long as it's always in the the forward position here, being partially secured by that set screw. So when you go to set up one of these things, keep this in mind, that screw needs to be somewhat secure and not loose, otherwise you're going to be experiencing this situation like that. So that's one of the things that I learned about on this. So the next thing to adjust here on this particular station is what's called the wad height. And again, the wad that comes with this is designed for 1 1/8 ounce, and this is a Winchester WAA-12 wad. Actually, this is the Claybuster replacement for the Winchester WAA-12 wad, and this is a standard wad that Dillon sets it up for. Now, this particular station here has and I should point out that I am using the Claybuster CB1100, which is the replacement for the Winchester WAA-12 SL wad. And as you can see here, and I have a better picture of it, we'll put this up, but as you can see from the picture and from this, the height of the wads are considerably different. This station here sets, or has the ability to set, the wad depth, and what you need to do is basically there's a screw here that brings the whole entire system up and down. If you have this set too low, it will crush the wad in the hole. If you have it set too high, and Dillon warns against this or cautions against it, the bar here will not get full travel because you're not basically actuating the whole entire system up high enough. So it's kind of a trick in that you want to get it set just right, in that you have the wad making contact with the powder. We mentioned before, we don't need to go off and worry about wad compression or anything like that, but you don't want to crush the wad, because if you do that, you're going to be decreasing the stack up of the whole entire shot shell. Now, we mentioned before about stack up and the importance of it. The whole entire stack up of a shot shell is basically the volume of the powder, the wad, the shot, and it's in the top of the shot column, and the proximity of it to the bottom of the crimp, or where the crimp begins on a shell. If your stack up is incorrect or too low, then you're going to get what we call dished crimps, and we're going to have an example here later. We'll show what a dished crimp is. But the problem I was fighting with this is that I'm using or putting an ounce, 7/8 of an ounce of shot into a wad that's really designed for 1 ounce. So automatically, because of that, I'm kind of experiencing, and always have been, even with the mech, I had the same issue of dished crimps. The better wad to go with here, and in fact John had pity on me because I sent a picture when I got this set up, sent it out on my Facebook account and said, well, this is about as good as it's going to get with the wad that I have. So John had pity on me and gave me as a Christmas present here a bag of the Claybuster CB0178 wads, which is the replacement for the Winchester WA12L wad. And my plan is I'm going to be switching to these wads once I complete using my pink wad. So a lot of guys, when they talk about wads, they'll throw the numbers out, and you know, the WA12 wad or the Claybuster, this is the CB1118 wad. A lot of the times we'll just call it the white wad. Okay, the other wad which I've been using is the CB1100. It's the WA12SL wad. You guys will call this the pink wad. And then the last one, the Claybuster CB0178, which is the 12L wad. They'll just call this the gray wad. So when people talk about pink, gray, and white in terms of Winchester, that's what they're talking about. So the gray wad is higher. You can see it here. Is taller than the pink wad. And it's taller in terms of the legs, but not in the shot cup. And the picture, again, will give a better representation of this. But what that basically means is that the whole entire stack of components sits higher in the hole than it would if you're using the pink wad. And because of that, you end up with a much better and flatter crimp. And I have a picture here that you will see here. In fact, you'll see it right now. That shows the gray wad sitting in front of a case that has been loaded with that particular wad, and then a pink wad in the crimp in a case that's been loaded with that particular wad. And you can see basically the difference there in the crimps of how that looks, and that you can see here that the wad, or I'm sorry, the wad or the shell has been loaded with the gray wad, has a much better, flatter, and nicer looking crimp. Now the other thing you're also going to notice in these crimps is that I'm getting what's called swirl. And what I've been doing in trying to counteract the problem, the fact that I'm using a wad and a stack up that's not designed optimally for what I'm using here, I'm over crimping the hole to try to close it faster, because if you don't, you'll end up with a little hole in the middle and the shot can come out of that. So what I'm doing is basically over crimping. My theory is that the petals will come together as it's being the final crimp. They'll all cram together and twist or swirl and close it up. So I'll take a swirl over a hole in the hole any day of the week. So basically that's what you're looking for here in terms of the wads, and the adjustment here at this station is that you need to make sure that you get this adjusted correctly. Too much, you crush wads. Not enough, you're going to not give a proper travel here of the shot bar, and we'll see that in action here a little bit later. The next adjustment here is pre-crimp, and that's what I was talking just briefly a moment ago about. That sets the pre-crimp on the hole. It starts closing it. They say they ideally want about 60% closure, and I'm closing it a lot more right now just to try to ensure that it is getting closed. And that is fully adjustable. Dillon also provides, and right now I have a 6-point crimp in there, but they also provide I have an 8-point crimp in there. They provide a 6-point crimp, and then they also provide a different die, which is for doing paper holes. So for those of you who are reloading the old federal papers and stuff like that, that's what you basically need to use for that. So this assembly would go up and replace the die that's here right now at pre-crimp. If I want to switch to a 6-point hole, I basically remove the plastic insert that's in there right now for 8 and put in a 6-point crimp. You can switch back and forth pretty quick. And the last adjustment is the final crimp, and the final crimp basically closes everything and sets the crimp depth, the final crimp depth of the hole. And there are 2 adjustments that you can do for that. It also does what's called kind of like a roll crimp. And since I'm shooting an over-under or break action gun, I don't really need to worry about too much about roll crimp. But for those of you who are shooting a autoloader or a pump, or is being fed into the case or into the chamber, I should say, the roll crimp can be a little more important. But at any rate, that's where you adjust that part. So basically, everything can be adjusted on this press to get it set up for your particular load. So I'm going to show the case feeder system here of how it works. And also talk about a modification that I made to it. So I'm just going to start out with a handful of holes here, toss that in. There is a switch here in the front. There's a micro switch that stops the holes, or stops the case feeder from feeding holes. So you'll see how this thing works here real quick. So what I discovered on this, and it automatically sets the hole right side up and drops it into the tube. Now, since I only have a few holes in it, it's going to take a little bit. So what I discovered on this is that I was getting a situation where a hole was coming down, and more often than not, they drop into this thing just fine. And that'll be the last one. You can see here that it automatically turned itself off because of the micro switch. Actually, I point out the first time that I set this thing up, when the holes would drop through, they wouldn't actually drop into the tube. There's basically a switch or a trigger arm here that had too much tension, and it was taking the hole and pushing it against the side over there. And Dillon even mentions that in their manual, that if you have problems with that feeding, that's what to look for. But the problem I was having in feeding is that every once in a while I would get a hole that would come down and bounce off the lip of the funnel tube here, and then go back up and jam into the rotary arm. So I was looking at this, trying to figure, okay, well, first off, identify the problem and see what's going on. And I could see, in fact, I filmed it and was able to look at it and see what happened. And I said, okay, it looks like the hole comes down, hits the lip, bounces back up. So I said, okay, well, how am I going to fix that? And I took the top of literally a shot shell box and duct taped it onto the front here, and basically just set up kind of like a little deflector and increase the height of the funnel, and it worked. So now I basically just have that little flap on there. The top duct tape here is just to keep this thing up, because otherwise after a while, since it's duct tape, it would start folding back. So my little piece of duct tape here on top does nothing more than just to hold this thing into place. But since putting that modification on there, I have not had a single problem with the case feeder. I pointed this out to Dillon, and they think the motor is actually turning too fast, so they sent me a replacement motor for this, but I haven't received it yet. So I'm using this for the time being, but it could very well be that the motor is actually turning too quick. The interesting thing is that, you know, I just said, hey, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I did, and without even asking for it, I get an email from them saying, we're sending you a new motor in the mail. So that's Dillon for you. But that's basically the case feeder of how it works, and it works out very well. It's one of the nice things about the press is that you don't really have to handle holes or anything like that. The only thing that you really handle while reloading is wads, and that's it. So I think what we'll do here, just so you can kind of see it from a clarity standpoint and understand what's going on, is I'm going to run one hole through here, just run it kind of like as a single stage press that's rotating, just so you can kind of see how that works, and then we'll eventually build up to having multiple holes in play. You can really see how this thing works. So first thing I want to do though is make sure that I have enough powder in the powder hopper here. So again, my favorite powder, clays. I use this for everything. So we'll put powder in the system here. And what I've found is this hopper holds enough powder, I think, for about maybe 150 to maybe 200 holes. It'd be nicer if it was a little bit larger, but again, it's using the same powder system that they use on the 550 or 650. And in case of pistol cartridges, you're dropping maybe 5 or 6 or maybe 7 grains of powder. I'm dropping 17 grains each time, so obviously I'm 3 times as much. So the next thing to do here is put some shot in. Now, one of the things is when I built this bench, or originally the plans for this bench have it built or shown it at about 4 inches higher than what it is right now. And I knew this press is really tall. And I was a little bit concerned about the fact that it might not be, I mean, I'm 6'1", and I was concerned that it might not be within reach. So I actually had the bench built about 3 or 4 inches lower than what it is. So take that into consideration here. If you're getting one of these presses, it's a tall press. So especially if you're trying to haul 25 pounds of shot up here. This is a shot bucket, and basically just dump shot into it here. So that's probably enough of that. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is run one hole through slowly so you can see how everything progresses at this point, so you can kind of get a feel for how everything works with one hole rather than multiple holes. So the first station here will drop a hole from the case feeder and then move it into position. It deprimes and resizes the hole. So just to get an idea here about what we're talking about is that this is the current dimension here that we're looking at. And I'm trying to get this in the front of the camera. There we go. So you can see here that I'm about 810 in terms of dial indicator on this particular hole. So I'm going to drop it into position, basically drop it down the tube. And I'm going to run this through here in station 1, and we'll take it out and take a look at it and see what the dimension is after the resizing. So kind of goes down, case feed or drops, and then is basically pushed forward into position here in station 1. Okay, so it's basically just inserted into play at station 1. And as I come up, and I'm going to put basically a primer into the system here because it goes into the next drop here at station 2. Okay, so you just heard actually what happened there is that the primer has been knocked out at station 1, and the new primer has dropped through a primer tube here into a pickup arm at station 2 and is dropped into position, and the case rotates into station 2. So I'm going to actually pull this case out here real quick. You can see obviously the primer's been knocked out, and we'll now measure this here. And you can see that it's been sized down to about what looks to be about 806, 807, somewhere in there. And that's about what you're looking for. You don't want to oversize the cases because as you're oversizing it, you're basically overworking the collet. I didn't mention it before, but the collet can be adjusted up and down at station 1 here to get the right sizing. So I'm going to put the case back into position here at station 2. The primer has been picked up by a primer arm, moved into position at station 2. You push forward on the handle to seat the primer. In fact, all the operations here are pull back and push forward. So you push forward on the primer, or sorry, on the arm, which seats the primer. And as I move up, it's now moving into position at station 2, and it's actuating the powder arm here, dropping powder into the system. And then as you rotate, it moves forward into position here at station 3. Okay, so here we are at station 3, and a lot actually happens here at station 3. And this is really the only manual operation in the whole entire process of reloading shotgun shells with an SL900 that you need to do. And that manual process is basically putting the wad into this holder here, and the arm pulls the wad into position. The case goes up slowly, inserts it into the case, and activates the shot drop bar here and drops shot into the shell. So at that point there, the hole now has, we'll take a look at it, now has shot a wad and is ready to be pre-crimped here in station 4. So at station 4, this is where the pre-crimp happens. Hole goes up, gets a pre-crimp, and before we mentioned about 60% closure, well, you can see here that I've got a lot more than 60% closure going on. In fact, I'm really over crimping this thing right now to make sure that I try to force this thing shut before it has a chance to dish in. Once I start using the right wad, when I start using the gray wad, the Claybuster gray wad, I won't have to worry about that, and I can actually back off that crimp a little bit and make it nicer looking. So put it back into position here at station 4. In fact, well, sorry, crimp it again. And then it goes on to station 5, and the final crimp here basically seats it, and then I don't have my bucket over here, but watch what happens. It takes it and kicks it out down the side. It would drop into a bucket, in my case. Didn't have it, dropped it onto the floor, but that's what we're looking for, or looking at in terms of a final crimp. So you can see a little bit of a hole, you can see the swirl action going. The thing with the holes is that not all these holes are exactly the same height, and obviously the amount of fold that you have here really depends on really the overall length of the shell. If the shell is short, then you're not going to have as much basically material here in the petals to close it. If it's long, you'll have more and you'll get a really tight closure. So unfortunately with shotgun shells, they're pretty close, but they're not all consistent, and a couple thousandths difference in just the simple height of the shell is going to make a difference in the final crimp. When I start loading with the correct wad, this is actually going to improve quite a bit, and it'll be a lot more consistent here, just because of the way it's closed and the way it's finally crimped. So I'm going to load everything up here. We'll turn everything on, and we'll load and run some holes through. You can see how the whole entire system works here with multiple shells in play to see what kind of speed you can actually do. And again, in terms of speed, I'm not trying to go fast right now. I've only had this press for about a week, and I'm really still just trying to learn it and learn how it works, so I don't want to start going too quick with it. I don't really know what this thing is capable of. I kind of got a ballpark feeling the other day for it, and it was about 5 minutes or so for a box. It may be less than that once I kind of get a feel for everything of how it goes. So we'll get this thing set up and ready to go here. So I'm going to start out here by taking a bunch of, I just have a bunch of holes here in my hopper, so I'm going to dump those into my case feeder here. And again, I'm really glad that that thing is not 4 inches taller, because that would be really tough to get into that. So I'm going to take the bucket and just stick it in the side over here and let that thing fill up with shotgun holes. And you really appreciate the case feeder here after you haven't used one before, just the fact that we're not having to handle holes at all. Okay, we're full. So they have basically just a plate here, kind of like a ramp here where the holes slide down. Put that into place here on the side. Nothing fancy. Now, in case of the primers, I'm not going to load the whole entire primer tray up with primers, because I'm not going to load 100 rounds today. But I'm just going to slide probably about 20 or so on here, just to get a feel for how this thing plays. So, well, it looks like we're going to go in 30. I just pulled a little bit too far. Pull it out, and the primers initially sit here at this loading gate or stop gate, and then you release them like that, so they all slide into position. Now you can see here in terms of the primer system, there's a bar here that travels back and forth that picks the primer up and moves it over to a tube that drops down and drops it into place. These are Federal primers, and they're a little bit larger than a Winchester primer. So I had to adjust to get this bar to travel far enough over in position to drop the primer down the tube. And there's a striker pin here which activates basically this. This is the drop tube here that activates it, and it is actually what causes the primer to drop. In fact, as I push that up, you can see here that it drops a primer down. Push that up, primer drops. In fact, I'm over traveling it. Here's what the issue is. Normally it wouldn't be doing that. So that pin adjusts basically the travel of the primer drop tube here. And you need to get that adjusted so it's reliably and consistently dropping primers down that drop tube into the pickup arm here. Okay, so now we're going to run this thing through here and we'll see all the stations in operation. So the first move here is on station 1. We get a hole from the tube here. It's moved into position here at station 1. And of course there's nothing here at station 2 to receive this primer, so I'm just going to put it back into the shot tray, or the primer tray. Okay, so station 1 at this point is now in position. On the upstroke, it's going to be deprimed and resized. And what has happened is at station 2, a primer has dropped down from the primer system here into the pickup arm, and it's going to be moved into position for the hole as it rotates into position here at station 2. So on the forward stroke here, the arm, what's going to happen is that it's going to seat the primer into station 2 and push the hole forward in station 1, like that. Now, one thing I've noticed here on the system is that in terms of the primer system, you need to listen for the primer to drop, and what I like to do is actually like to see the primer being moved forward into the pickup arm and moved into position. And the last part is the feel of feeling the primer being pushed into the pocket. It's very important here on this press to really kind of get a feel for the feel, so to speak, of the operation. Is that as soon as anything stops or jams, you really want to stop and see what's going on. So listening, observing, and feeling is pretty much key to just producing holes here in this thing. So at this point now, on the upstroke, what's going to happen is at station 1, again, it's going to be deprimed and resized. At station 2, it's going to come up and receive powder. Okay, so right now another primer has dropped into the transfer arm, moves into position. The hole at station 2 now moves to station 3, and at station 3 now we're ready to go ahead and receive the wad and then the shot. Okay, so the wad and shot has been inserted into station 3, and at station 4 now it's going to get pre-crimped. I need to insert into the wad here for the next hole. So station 4 now goes over to the final crimp. And that drops into the bucket. And now it's just a matter of inserting wads and producing shells. And you don't want to go too fast in this, because if you start going too fast, you're going to start running into problems here of things not happening in full cycle. If you short stroke it or go too quick, I found you start running into issues. So you just want to make sure that you're running at a nice smooth rate here, not moving that arm too quick. As I'm doing this, I'm just kind of observing everything that's happening here, particularly the primer system, of making sure that the primer is dropping, moving the arm, and I'm not moving the arm too quick. Now you can see here as I get going, it's just pretty much a matter of inserting wads and producing shotgun shells. So the only thing that you're really handling here is wads, and that's it. And I'm just feeling or using the feel of the handle here to just make sure that everything's progressing smoothly. And I think anybody who has a progressive press will pretty much tell you the same thing. Okay, so hope you guys enjoyed that reloading on the Dillon SL900. Again, I've only had this thing for about a week and I'm still kind of trying to learn it and everything, but at any rate, I think it's going to be a definite improvement over the single stage mech. So I got a trivia question for you. This is kind of, for those of you who have been watching the program over a period of time, you're going to immediately know what the answer to this is. So here's the question. what is this and what have we recommended it being used as or used for in the past. So we've talked about these things before. It's a certain item that you can get, and we recommend why or how you end up using these. So for those of you who know the answer, go ahead and get it in, and we'll get something out to you. So if you have any questions, you can hit the website at powerfactorshow.com. As usual, email at powerfactorshow@gmail.com, and also the Facebook website, which I noticed Rick during the last episode just kind of glanced over and said, yeah, and then the Facebook website. So facebook.com/powerfactorshow. So again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.